I come from a C++ background, but more and more, I'm almost always using Python, and a lot of my libraries are C++ underneath. And in fact, I've been running so much Python, now I go back to C++, and it's kind of weird. So that was disconcerting to me.
So it's funny you say that because that's exactly what I am. I learned C++ from the very beginning. I programmed competitive robots for first robotics in C++. And before we moved into Jetsons, a lot of our projects were Arduino based, which is also heavily C++ based. So again, a C++ background, I moved to Python, and this was the second real Python project I ever did. But it is just so easy to pick up coming from a C++ background.
Gotcha. Yeah. And I think before the show you were like showing us, I think you used Visual Studio Code to show us. Maybe people would be interested just to browse real quick what the code actually looks like, how you bring all
Yeah.
this together.
You see it? Yep.
Yeah.
So we have a variety of bits of code in here. So, for example, this is our navigates library. This is the one that I wrote. This is what actually has the PID objects. And you feed it the set points, and you set it up, you feed it all the gains, you tell it the radius that you want it to fly at, cycle time, allowed error, orbit speed, all fairly simple stuff here. Hover height, hover throttle, all things that we just kind of entered. Simple things like change the radius, so you want it to fly further away, changing the orbit speed, how fast you want it to orbit, loop time, angles, some simple mapping stuff that I wrote to make stuff easier, and then the actual tick function. So this is what actually takes in your current x, y, and your height, if you want it to orbit or not, and then does the math to figure out what you want it to be doing, if it should be in a mode where it's ready to fire, maps the outputs, and then outputs the PIDs directly.
So do you think this would be easy to extend to, let's say, like an outdoor scenario where, say, we were doing before the call, like James, he built a land speeder out there, and you want this drone to follow along with him as like his protector or something. Do you think it would be possible to augment this code so it could follow the person in addition to just like hovering around them? Or is that something you've even already tested? But if you stepped backwards or forwards, would it actually follow you around?
So I don't know if we actually tested it, but I think there's no reason that it shouldn't be able to do it, just because all it's doing is trying to lock the drone in a position relative to the person. So if the person moves, the drone says, oh, it thinks that it got closer to the person, so it needs to back up.
Okay, so it does
So
take translation into account.
yeah, there's no reason why it shouldn't be able to follow someone.
Okay, it looks like this is the main loop of the whole thing.
Yeah.
Cool.
So this was what actually kind of kept track of everything. Read the S-Bus protocol. It was another bit of code we had to write.
Yeah, it's
This is what
pretty
actually
heavy duty.
does a lot of the bit shifting to read the S-Bus signal, which actually really at the end of the day isn't that complicated.
Did you need to use like Python threads or anything to make this all work, or?
So the way we actually did it, let me see if I can find the example. Yeah, we did have to thread it. We just had processes.
Oh, right, yeah. Because Pythons, they don't really have concurrent threads with the global interpreter lock, but it does have a nice multi-processing library.
Yeah, so we just ran the other code, passed a pipe back and forth, or used a pipe and a queue for it. A pipe for, I think it was the Z, and a queue for the S-Bus, I think. Maybe, no, I think it's a pipe for both now. And then just pass the data through it to. Yeah, it wasn't that complicated at the end of the day. It was actually easier than I expected coming from a C++ background.
Yeah. So basically, you have a process that runs the Z, gets the tracking vectors, and you pass this along to your S-bus process to send those flight commands over to the controller. Is that the
Yeah.
gist of it?
Yeah, so like in the S bus is where we actually we connect the serial in here, and we just read the channels and we just send the channels back to the main process, and then we can send the channels, the output channels back to the S bus system, and then it outputs it to the drone. Then same with the Z, if I can find it. Again, very, very simple code. We just read all this is what tracks the ID to keep track of the person. We just find the objects in it. We find the people, we look up the numbers, and then we just pass it through.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean that's pretty easy without you didn't really need to use all your own machine learning models and stuff, although you could have, but the Z, basically just wraps all that up for you and uses CUDA and everything.
Yeah.
And you got some kudos on the chat for your nicely written, well-commented code, even though maybe nobody will actually see this, but it's always good to see that you put a lot of care into that.
Yeah, Sophie, our co-op, wrote a lot of this like boilerplate stuff. So
you have to make a gift to yourself sometimes on those kinds of things. So when you go back, you can remember what you were doing.
Yeah, I can't take the credit for this code. The navigation code was mine, and then the kind of main loop, all the more of that integration was mine. You can tell what code I wrote versus what code she wrote. Very obvious based on what has comments or not.
Yeah. Either way, it looks great. And do you have any future plans for this drone? Using another video or anything else you could use it for, maybe?
Sadly, the plans for this guy is for it to be taken apart.
Do you have
all plan? So this was the kind of animation we put together, how it goes together. So that's our water jet cutter. So we're actually water jet cutting the frame.
Nice.
And then the final assembly. So the funny part, so this assembly, amazing sequence, took a while to film, but afterwards we still had to pull the whole thing apart again to make some final changes, replace some components, add thread locker. So if you see something in the video, it's often not the real time that we're doing it.
How many times did you build this thing?
So this would have been like the second, so this shot right here would have been the second time we're putting it together after we kind of made sure everything fits. We didn't fully wire everything up, but we made it good enough that it went together fairly quickly. Assembled it this time, and then had to pull apart and assemble it one more time. So this full drone was assembled 3 times.
Yeah, it's very professional. I would not say at all this is like hacked together willy-nilly.
Yeah.
You should see my projects, man.
The name is a little misleading, isn't it?
Yeah, well, that's what we were. So very, very pretty drone. I was happy with it.
Awesome. Well, we have about 10 minutes left, and I know, Ben, this was your most recent project that was using the Jetson and that Z camera, but I believe you mentioned you actually had a previous project that kind of got you started with computer vision and the Jetson. Would you be able to tell us and show us a little bit about that too?
Yeah, so the first Jetson project that I ever did would have been our Predator helmet. So we were trying to replicate the movie Predator.
Where he has that it's basically like infrared vision, right?
It is. It's multispectral is the fancy way of saying it.
Multispectral.
So that was the first project at the beginning of my current co-op term. So that would have been almost a year ago at this point. And it was a Jetson Xavier NX.
Okay. So did I get that right? There were 3 cameras, or were there 2?
Three cameras.
3. Okay.
And then
Yeah, I think it doesn't have audio. That's okay though if you want to talk over it.
so this is just some of my previous projects. And so that's actually some clips just from the movie. So those are some of the cameras that we used. So there's some of the products. So the Jetson, the FLIR camera, a set of Zeiss Cinemizer goggles, and then the Raspberry Pi cameras. Went over all the spectrums that it was. That's just standard thermal camera stuff. The assembly, that was the thermal camera module that we used. It's a FLIR Lepton. Writing the code.
So essentially you nice hacker scene there. So essentially you're mounting
Well, we
those
can really type.
those VR goggles inside the helmet, passing the camera video. So you don't really see outside the helmet at all yourself.
Not at all.
It's all redisplayed. Wow.
So right now you can actually see this is what it is. That's the camera's view, and then you hit the button and it transitions. So that would have been the IR camera. And that was thermal. That was before I kind of lined up the overlays, but in the end I got them more lined up when everything was rigidly mounted. You can see, actually that was a fun scene because you can see that our roof is very hot. This was before we had proper insulation in the roof, and it was very hot upstairs. So we saw like 35 degrees Celsius on some days. And that was actually what helped us diagnose the fact that it was so hot upstairs. Just thermal camera. So that was where's the shot? That was all 3 of our cameras mounted side by side. So we have our standard camera, the No IR, and then the FLIR Lepton thermal camera. So this was a cool project. It wasn't incredibly complicated, but it was a cool use of the technology of the Jetson that had just come out. And then that was when we added the sounds and all the animations.
Can you skip ahead to where it shows like the actual helmet, or
Yeah.
I remember there being like a cool visualization?
That actually might have been in the second video. So that was the helmet assembled.
Wow.
With the control system. So the camera's mounted in the helmet. So it's actually not that big. Here's just James kind of going around. So this is a little fun scene to shoot. Dramatic music.
He does a lot of stalking in his videos, I've noticed.
It's easy to script and shoot. Yeah. This is just him actually going around using the helmet. You can see it does work.
Yeah. It looks just like the movie too. So did you notice any like lag issues with like how did you get good frame rate out of this? Somebody was asking in the chat.
It wasn't amazing, but it was good enough to walk around. Like he could walk around with the field of view that we had with the lag. I think we looked and there was about 50 milliseconds of lag, which isn't terrible.
No, I think a lot of it has to do with the synchronization of 3 separate cameras, and you're always waiting on some new camera to come in, and so yeah, that's pretty good. 50 millisecond glass to glass.